Hey, everybody, and welcome to the summer session in 2020 in World Civilizations 1. This is your mini lecture video that goes along with your first discussion board question. And as we go forward through this summer session, you will see a video associated with every discussion board question. So your first chapter in the discussion board is, or your first chapter in the coursework is on human evolution. And this coming week, your next group of chapters that you're studying is going to begin with the agricultural revolution and sedentary agriculture in the Fertile Crescent and in the Indus Valley, which is in India, and modern day Pakistan. So let's just take a moment here to kind of wrap our brains around what we're doing. So history is really the story of people. It's not really just names and dates, and it's not just about events. It's what makes events happen. That's how I look at history. History isn't just something that you study to kind of get the highlights from. I think you need to know what are the motivating factors, what's happening, are there trends, are there ways that we can look to the future, and by looking at the past, using the past sort of as a crystal ball to be able to predict what the future will hold or predict behaviors of people that can kind of help us understand and telegraph where are we going in the future. And we're still very much a part of who we were and our very core beginnings. So as we go through this short session, there are some things that I do want you to be paying attention to. One of those things is power. Who has power? Where does that person get the power? How do they get the power? How do they keep the power? Are they using their power to help the people? They're using the power that they have in order to help themselves. What motivates people to want to conquer other places? And how do, what legitimizes power? How do you legitimize power? Is power legitimized through votes of the people, or is power legitimized through the gods, through the heavens? Absolute power to rule, the divine right to rule, the mandate of heaven gives you the divine right to rule. But with that leadership, with that ability to rule, even through the divine right of rule, is that the license to do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it? Can you rape, rob, and pillage, and there be no ramifications to it? And all those questions are determined by where you are and the time that where you are and what's happening in that time. It is not, you can't say definitively that the further back you go, the more simple people were, or the more brutal and barbaric people were. That's not legitimate to say. We all have a tendency to be brutal and barbaric no matter the time. And we can see that even now. As we go, starting this semester, as we begin, let's look at the first chapter. Now, the first chapter is on human evolution. And in U.S. history, or whoopsie daisy, in world history, in U.S. history, to any kind of history, really, truthfully, in order to really grasp what's going on in history, you're looking at many different types of things, so history combines sociology, anthropology, political science, economy, religion, there are a lot of things that make history, because remember, as I mentioned moments ago, it's the story of people. And being a human being, there are certain things that unite us all, that connect us all, regardless of where we come from on the planet. So, the first thing that unites us is that we all feel inadequate in some form or fashion. If you're not a sociopath or a psychopath, and those are legitimate mental health illnesses. If you are not that, if you are what we would call loosely a normal human being, then you're going to feel unsure of yourself. You're going to feel inadequate yourself. You're going to be your worst enemy. We are our own worst enemy. We pick at ourselves. We complain about ourselves. We look in the mirror. We say what's wrong with ourselves. We rarely look at ourselves, when, just to ourselves, all alone in the bathroom or in the bedroom or wherever we are. We pick at ourselves all of the time. And so that innate belief that you are not enough, that you need more to make yourself who you are, that's a motivator. That's a driving factor in why people do what they do and creating events. Another thing that is a driving, motivating factor is our sexuality. We are driven by sex. We do things. We make bad choices. Sometimes we make good choices, but what motivates us is also the desire for sex. Not necessarily love, that's different, but sex. Another motivator is fear of death. To be human means that you are afraid of the unknown, of what is death. And so we do things, we act on things to make us feel better about the inevitable, which is death. We're driven by hunger. We are driven by hunger and thirst, two very, very normal things we need to have in order to sustain our lives, food and water. So very, very important drivers. Armageddon, the word Armageddon actually comes from a word for a town called Megiddo, which is in modern day Israel. And Megiddo is a town, or was a town, and I think it still is actually, that was located in the northern part of what is modern day Israel. And it was the well. It was the town that had the largest well. And because if you look on a map and you look and see the country of modern day Israel, you will see that it is the only land route between Africa and if you're going to Asia. So if you're in Africa and you want a land route, you're going to have to go through what is modern day Israel in order to get east to Asia. It's also, if you want to go up into Europe, it's going to be your only land route to get up into Europe. So, and for people who were in Asia or in what is modern day Europe or the Balkans, if they wanted to go down into Africa, North Africa, specifically Egypt and North Africa, to get food, because ancient Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world, then you had to go through what is modern day Israel. So when you go through that land, that space, that connecting piece of land between Asia and Africa and Asia and Europe, you have to do it with wells. You have to go from oasis to oasis, or from one well to another well. That's the route that you take. And all the towns grew up around these wells. Why? Because it's a very dry, arid environment. And if you're going to move cattle and human beings, you have to have food and you must have water. So whoever owned the wells owned everything. They were the wealthiest and the most powerful people in that area, which is one of the reasons why the Middle East has always been a contentious place on the planet. And so Megiddo was the town with the well, the largest well in the northern part of what is modern day Israel. And so whoever owned that well, like I said, had the power and was the wealthiest person in the town. And over time, people came and conquered Megiddo, got rid of that person, and just burned the town to the ground. Burned it to the ground. They didn't come in knocking on the door saying, "Hey, I'm going to take this town over." Of course not, right? You're going to fight for your town, where you live. So people are going to come in who want to conquer it and take over the control of that water source, that resource that everybody has to have so that they can get wealthy. They want a piece of that. So they come in, they burn the town to the ground, and they rebuild. And it happened so many times in the ancient world that the word Armageddon comes from those series of events. Armageddon was right? It's the destruction of the world as we know it. Well, in Megiddo, every few decades or centuries, you would have destruction of the whole city as people knew it. And so naturally, that concept of destruction and Armageddon is derived from something that's very real. So that source, that water source, that resource that we have to have was the basis for the stories and the belief system in Armageddon. So these natural resources, are motivating factors. They drive us to do things. With regards to Megiddo, it was the driving of conquering, of being able to conquer Megiddo and the surrounding regions, and holding power because you own the only water source. Now, when you have resources that you own, whether it's water or food resources, these are hunger and thirst, things that drive you, then you set the price. And once you set the price, then oopsie daisy. Oops. Then you have the ability to gain in wealth. When you gain in wealth, then you gain in power. Sometimes it's real power. Sometimes it's perceived power. So the mantra in this class that I really want you guys to think about through the whole 8 weeks is land equals wealth equals power. Land equals wealth equals power. Land, what does land? And land, it's not the dirt on the land, it's the resources the land provides. The resources the land provides. So that resource could be food, grains. That resource could be grasses for herders, shepherds, pastoral nomads. The resources could be water. The resources could be metal, gold. The resources could be iron for weapons, or metals that create bronze. So that is very important. Once you own the land, which has what? The resources on it, then once you own those resources, then you set the price for the resource. You own the resource because you own the land, so you set the price for the resource. When you set that price for the resource, if you are the only game in town for that resource, then chances are you will become wealthy. And with that wealth comes power, or just as important, the perception of power. And the perception of power is something we still struggle with. We all struggle with this because we assume many times that people who are wealthy must be smarter. They must have, there must be something they have that I don't have. And so it is a natural impulse for other folks, or for folks in general, to want to be around the people who are wealthy, and by default, their perception of power, true, real or not, because you want to see what are they doing that I could learn from, so that I too can be as powerful, or I too can be as wealthy. And if we don't look at where they're getting their wealth from, then we're having a false sense of understanding of their power. Because if they own all the resources, and that's how they get their power, then, and you don't have access to those resources, then you're not going to ever attain that same kind of power they have. So this is a theme that's going to run throughout history and still is with us today. Okay, so by comparison, in the modern world, you don't have to own land, although there are a lot of people in the world who say owning real estate is a way to grow your wealth. But let's use modern concepts of land. Land now, why did we want land back in the ancient world? Because of resources. Nowadays, those resources don't have to come from land, do they? People who want to know more about us have a very easy time knowing more about us because we use social media. We are on Amazon. I was just on Amazon. I mean, all of us do this. I mean, there's no moral failing in this, okay? So we're on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that kind of stuff. And me too. And every time we click on something, it's a data point. So Facebook and Twitter and all the companies that own these large social media platforms, they own the resource, which is the data points, and all the data that is associated with everything we click on and everything we do. Now, they own that resource. Now, companies can come along and say, I want your data. Cambridge Analytica, various other ones. They come over to us and they say, go to Facebook and Twitter to say, I want your data. And so they go in and they pick out the algorithms they want, and now they own, and Facebook and those guys, they can set the price on that. But now, once Cambridge Analytica or some of these data resources hubs get that data, now they can use it. They can then manipulate, they become wealthy on it by how they manipulate that data. And that the manipulation of that data can swing us from one idea to another idea. It can swing us into, if you're liberal, it can put you into a deep hole of only looking at liberal things. If you're conservative, it can put you in a deep hole of only looking at conservative things, because that's how the algorithm works. And so Facebook owns, let's say Facebook, but it could be Twitter, like I say, it doesn't really matter. But once they have the resources, they own the resources. Now they can sell the resources at whatever price they want, which makes them extremely wealthy. And it gives them a tremendous amount of power to who they're selling it to, why they're selling it, how it's being used. And that power That power in many ways is very, very real, but it's not really a perceived power. It is a real power. So as opposed to looking at TV stars or sports stars, they have a great deal of power, but it's perception. We give them that power. It's perceived power. We give them that power. We want to be around them. We want to hang out with them because we think they're so great. But that's giving them power. And because we're giving up something of ourselves, and we're putting them on a pedestal, which by default gives them power. And that doesn't mean they're going to use the power for bad or any of that kind of stuff. We just have to recognize power. We have to recognize how it's used. We have to recognize how it remains, how it's legitimized, and how it's lost. Okay, so that's very important. We're also going to look at religion because remember, as I said, we're driven by a desire, or a worry and a concern about what happens after death. Religion gives us a good feeling that there's something after death, and it helps us. It also, because it controls our behavior, because it's legitimized by God. And if God says, or the gods say you have to behave in a certain way, then you're going to do it because what's going to be the ramifications of that? So again, religion drives us. So I want you to think about that. Power drives us. Money, economics drives us, religion drives us, or the fear of death, the need to control behavior drives us, and religion helps us with that, as do laws. But why are laws? Laws in the books are a reflection of the culture, just like art is a reflection of the culture, just like literature is a reflection of the culture. Rap is a reflection of the Black community. When it started especially, it was very much a reflection of the Black community. Motown was that. Rock and roll was something different. Classical came in the time period, in a different time period. Music, jazz is great. Jazz American, it's an American genre of music. Where does it come from? So there's deep in how we understand society, music, literature. It is a reflection of the community into which it was born. So that's something to really remember as you read through these sources and read through your text. The Venus figure, is an indication. What is that an indication of? And so I want you to think about those kinds of things. What is that a reflection? The Venus figure, the Venus of Willendorf. What is that a reflection of? What does that tell you about the society and the culture of the time? Which then leads me naturally to the agricultural revolution. But for a moment, I want to take a little detour. When we, in your first chapter, when we're reading about human evolution, I do understand that some folks, some of you guys, do not believe in human evolution. And this is a kind of a conflict for you, an internal struggle and conflict. Well, you really will go into human evolution in an anthropology course, which I would recommend everybody take. Believe or no, I think it's very important that you become in order to become formally educated, you need to entertain and learn about thoughts that might not be exactly the same as yours, and mull it over and make decisions, about what you believe after that, after you're introduced. Education should be just a little bit uncomfortable at times because you're going beyond what you know, hopefully, and I hope that you entertain other ideas. There was a scientist named Carl Sagan back in the 70s who wrote a book about human evolution. And all I really want to say regarding that is that you can still be very religious and also believe in human evolution. And Carl Sagan says it in this way. He says, what if God made great apes and said, I think I'll try something different. And that the natural evolutionary path was something that was started by God. Science and theology, belief in God, do not have to be separate. You can have them both. It's all just depends on how you evaluate the information, how you look at it, and how far outside of your comfort zone you want to go. You don't have to believe that, but there are many scientists in the world who are very religious people as well, and so it's just something to think about. But with that being said, let's jump forward to the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution happens around 10,000 BCE, and we're going from hunters and gatherers to sedentary agriculturalists. We're farmers. We're getting into horticulture, and I want you to focus on two branches here. Two branches of people emerge from the agricultural revolution that really pretty much stay with us all the way into the modern world, and that's going to be people who believe in community property. So the whole community owns the property and works the land together. And in those situations, in those cultures and societies where the community owns the property, you find that males and females have specific gender roles and responsibilities, but the power dynamic between the two genders is really not existent. There's not one has more power than the other. They're far more equal. So that's an important thing to think about. In communities where people own the property together as a community, there's no private ownership, then that is where we find gender roles, but power differentials kind of don't exist. Or let's just say each has power over the other, but as far as how they see each other, they're more equal than non-community owned land. So the other side is private ownership, the belief in private land ownership. And in private land ownership that we see in the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia, that's where we're going to see the beginnings of not only gender roles, but those gender roles are tied to power differentials, where we see the rise of the patriarchal cultural and societal norms and social hierarchy, and where we see women's value decrease. And if you do watch The Ascent of Woman Part 1, you will see and you'll hear from the laws from ancient Sumer to the Assyrians how that power differential really made a big change. So that is very important as we move forward, because we still live in a very patriarchal world. Women still, by and large, take their husband's last name. And yet, in some religions like Judaism, the lineage, the Judaic lineage is passed down from the mother to the children. So if a woman is Jewish, the children are automatically Jewish. So if the father's not, then the children are still Jewish. But that also sets up a dynamic that's issue if a woman who is Jewish is married to a Muslim man, and in Islam the children belong to the men, then and they get a divorce, then we have a problem, okay? Because the children belong to the women in Judaism, whereas In Islam, the children belong to the male line. There we get a sticky wicket. Still, it plays a role. The societal norms and social hierarchies, we really see that happening in societies where land ownership is private land ownership. And the last thing that I really want to say in this little mini lecture is, as you go through the earliest river civilizations, which is Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus Valley, and the Yellow River, which you'll read about in China next week, you will notice, obviously, they need to be near fresh water, because why? Because they're agriculturally based. And they need to grow their food. So there's just a couple of things that I want to mention at the end here. First of all, what makes the agricultural revolution a real revolution? Because we use revolution, that word, a lot, and we lose its meaning, we lose its value. Real revolution is when you change the way you do things after you something happens, you experience something. And in this regard, the agricultural revolution changes the world because of one technology, irrigation. One technology, irrigation. And that allows for land to be used for planting and harvesting. So that technology, and what are people controlling for the very first time in their lives? What natural resource? Water. So very important transition that changes the dynamic of the world. Now, not every place in the whole world this is happening at the same time. But it happens first in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in Indus Valley, and in China along the Yellow River. So those are the 4 earliest river civilizations. Technology makes a big change. And technology is the driving force for all these river civilizations. And their technology is amazing, just freaking amazing. And that's something I want you guys to think about. Remember, these people in these earliest civilizations, they do not have algebra. They don't know pi. Maybe they eat pi, but not 3.14. So they don't have geometry like we know it today. Maybe they had something else, but they did not have the engineering resources that we like to think of ourselves as having now, that technological advances. And yet, they were freaking amazing. They were so amazing in their technology. Indus Valley blows my mind when I think about the technology, the way their houses were, 300 Harappan city-states, all the same city planner, but city planning. They had sewage systems. They had their sewage system didn't empty into the fresh water system, so it made people safe. How did they know that? So, and how were they able to produce these 300 city-states that all had clean, fresh water for their people? I mean, there's so much stuff, it just blows my mind. And so I don't want you to think that just because we're looking at 3500 BCE, we're looking at people who aren't like us. They were very much like us. The only difference is that their technology was new, and it was and they were just working with the things they had to work with, the environment they were working in, just like we do now. We take for granted all the things we have, but they didn't have TV, and they didn't have stuff like that. So they were productive in different ways, but they were technologically very advanced in their day. And some of the things they did, we still could learn from. So I just really want you to keep that in mind. Technology is really important, and I want you to think about it as you read through your chapters. So, I hope this little mini lecture was not too rambling for you. I want you to think about the mantra in the class as you go forward. Land equals wealth equals power. I want you to understand why that is the case. What does land have? Why would it equal wealth? Why would it equal power? I want you to think about modern ways to use that mantra. I want you to understand what drives us, our feelings of inadequacy, our desires for sexuality, to express our sexuality, our desires to understand and not fear life after death, our desire for food and for water. These are all things that are very, very important, and those are motivating factors that drive us to do things that culminate in events throughout history. So keep that in mind. Please stay safe. If you need me, I'm around, as you can see plainly. Just email and we'll get through it. Okay? And enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Remember, make your very first initial post by Saturday, and then your final post by next Tuesday. This discussion board closes down on Tuesday of next week. And remember, our weeks start from Wednesday and they end on Tuesdays of the following week. Because why? We started, our first day of our semester was a Wednesday, and I think it's easier to keep that going. Okay?